The first recommendation is to inspire interfaith communities. To remember that one of the most effective ways that the right wing is able to advance their particular agenda is to say that they're speaking for the religious voice. And when people come together across these differences, when they recognize common cause in resisting measures that hurt all kinds of different people in many different ways, they can serve as a counterweight to that narrative and to that effort to sideline other religious people who don't support particular far-right, right-wing understandings of religion, far-right understandings of sexual orientation, far-right understandings of the economy. And they're able to push back. So that's the first thing. The second thing is something that we already spoke about, which is the hate framework, and that we really, really need to push back on the idea that hate only consists of interpersonal violence with one another, and that hate can't function in a systemic way. That hate can function when a governor or a mayor chooses to clear an unhoused encampment with people who have nowhere else to go. Hate can function when a government chooses to criminalize particular identities at higher rates and chooses to build prisons, to build private prisons where people who are disproportionately Black and brown are being held. And so that's the other thing, is that when we understand hate, we shouldn't be putting hate in a box. We should be remembering that it functions and affects people in many, many different ways. And we have to be sensitive and nuanced in how we understand and locate where we see it originating. And so then the next thing is to prioritize religious literacy. And I think this is related to the first recommendation, but it's really touching on this idea that if we don't understand who religious people are, if we don't understand their concerns, if we don't understand that we and our families are of these communities in many, many different ways, we can end up relying and creating narratives that are just wrong. And we can end up creating a situation where we're relying on poll data rather than actually being in conversation with one another. And I think this ends up playing itself out, especially within DC and New York-based nonprofits and think tanks, where they're not actually scratching the surface to know what it means and what it feels like to hold a particular religious belief, or what it feels like to belong to a community. That when you look at it on the surface, you come with a set of preconceived judgments, where there are certain secular understandings of what a community should look like. And so I think that's the third thing, prioritizing religious literacy. The fourth is related to what we were talking about with truth-telling, sharing narratives of belonging, making sure that people see themselves represented in television and media, making sure that as this effort to infringe on the truth, to overturn Wikipedia's fact-checking people, which I read about today, that there's an effort to be reversing their own standards, to be targeting people who are Wikipedia editors, to resist that and to call a spade a spade. And I think we just marked the anniversary of January 6th. There's going to continue to be a sustained effort to remake the meaning of that day, to remake the meaning of a day that really illustrated the dangers and threat of American fascism. And so I think one of the most important counterweights to that are narratives of belonging, really illustrating what the reality actually looks like, how people's lives show up differently, how we show up for one another differently, and to then support and to build on that narrative through really, really strategic media literacy. And then I think the fifth is something that I'm unfortunately skeptical about within the next Congress, but it's to really prioritize better data collection. We can't actually make a dent in hate crime prevention if we don't understand where and how it's happening. And there are many, many different ideas for how to implement or how to build strategies for better hate crime reporting. But until we have a better sense of which communities are under threat and how they're under threat and how to organize against those who are hurting them, it will be very, very hard to be doing activism and to be doing advocacy alongside those communities. And so I also want to just quickly take a moment to uplift one of our other case studies, which was based in Minnesota, and they actually helped pass a hate crimes piece of legislation that Governor Walz signed. And they did really invaluable work, building connections between Jews and Muslims and people across all racial and religious differences, to prioritize hate crime prevention in the wake of an attack on a mosque in Minnesota. And so this work is possible. It's possible on the local level. It's possible on the national level. We just have to continue believing and insisting that the people who are fighting against us cannot win.